Hello everyone, I'm Nidoking, and this is another brand new Let's Play. Most of the time when I do a Let's Play, it's because I really love a game and I want everyone to get to see it. Sometimes I really hate a game and I want people to get to know why. This particular game, I don't know how to feel about it. This is Sinner, Sacrifice for Redemption, or just Sinner as the title screen says. And it's basically Dark Souls with all the fun parts removed, such as the ability to see the story of the game on a second playthrough. Naturally, I had to beat it once before attempting to record it because nobody wanted to see my first attempt at the game. And on the second playthrough, this is all you get. You don't get the story about how this character is trying to redeem their sins, but then again, I don't know that that really adds all that much to the game. It's a boss rush. There's no character customization. There's no enemies to fight as such. There's no leveling up. In fact, you kind of level down as the game progresses. And because I was messing around with the challenge mode, my character is already equipped with the one thing you get for beating the game, a secondary weapon. But here's the default sword and shield. And that's all the tutorial you get before getting into some enemies that you really aren't going to be able to deal with if you just know how to attack and nothing else. These are all the enemies you get to fight in the game, more or less. The ones that appear when you talk to the ghosts that give you tutorials. They don't explain a lot of the game. They don't explain much in the way of the controls. They don't really tell you how to play the game, for the most part. And when I went through the tutorial, I didn't manage to kill a single enemy. And they don't respawn. I don't know whether it's because I didn't talk to the ghost that gives you the tutorial again. Wasn't much point, because I'd already heard what it had to say. Or maybe they just don't appear again in general, and you only get one chance to practice any of your moves. Whatever is the case, you don't get a lot of time to get used to how this game works. And that's going to be a big problem, because the entire game consists of fighting bosses. There's a run button. The game doesn't tell you about the run button unless you go into the control list and look and see there is a run button. It tells you how to use items. It doesn't tell you what any of them do. There's the healing item I've already used once. But then we get a couple of additional items. We get these lightning javelins. They do a bit of splash damage to surrounding enemies. It's fairly fine. Then we get these fire bombs. Kinda coat the ground with fire. And a fire buff that damages your character as much as it damages enemies. I really don't see the point. I never use that. And that's our tutorial. After this, we're going right into boss fights. You don't get a lot of time to figure out what your character's capabilities are before they all get taken away from you. And again, there's something about the bosses representing the 7 deadly sins. I think you get more information from reading press releases about the game than you do from playing the actual game. This is our world hub. We'll be spending most of our time here, more or less. And we've got these 7 stone monuments around that represent the 7 bosses we've got to fight. If you've played Demon Souls, it's all familiar. If you haven't, then I don't know how you're supposed to really understand what's going on. This is the weapon that we start the game with in place of these dual cleavers. We've got just a greatsword. I'm going to take that into the first boss fight because I know the first boss is particularly weak to this weapon. And I say first boss, you can fight them in any order you want. The game starts you in front of this particular pillar, thus indicating that that's the first boss you should fight. And I do recommend it, but I think it's really the worst of the bosses for you to get the hang of the game fighting against. And again, as you meet each of these bosses the first time, your first playthrough of the game, there are animated, voiced cutscenes that explain who these people were in life. I don't think it adds anything to the game. I don't know who my character is, I don't know who they are, I don't know what their relationship to my character is. I don't understand any of this stuff. So in order to fight this boss, we have to give up part of our HP and stamina meters. Again, if you've played Dark Souls, you know what those are. If you haven't, the game doesn't explain any of it. We could get that power back, but then we would give up the ability to fight this boss. I'm going to go in with the sword and shield first, just because I know I'm going to be at a distance, and I may have to block some ranged attacks. Like this. And already I'm about half dead, just having entered the arena, not getting a chance to do anything to the boss at all. Given this is a second playthrough, there is a little bit of information that's missing, but you don't really get much more than this. Now, the game hasn't made it explicit that your HP recovers over time. It doesn't really tell you much about how to fight, it doesn't give you anything. And this guy will just stomp you into the ground over and over until you get extremely frustrated. And that was my first experience of the game, so you can probably see why I didn't like it very much. I've stuck with it since. Clearly I have managed to beat it at least once. And the key is, get up close to Faiz Tilus, I think that's how it's pronounced. Do some damage, and then roll out of the way, because he will try to stun you in the clouds of poison that come out of him every time you hit him. He's just got so many different attacks, it's kind of hard to talk about them all. Most of them you'll be able to see here. Get an idea of how you would deal with them. He spits out these little slugs that'll explode and poison you. Those little truffle things pop up all over the place. Those will poison you. Parrying is the best way to deal with that big white projectile that he shoots at you. It homes. It will follow you pretty much forever. It'll go through anything. And about the only advantage I've found is that if you hit him with the greatsword, you'll stagger him in the middle of whatever attack he's doing, usually. So sometimes the best defense is a good offense. I'll give the fire buff a try, but I ran right into the middle of several attacks. That's the big problem with this game, is that so many things will do so much damage to you in a short time. Most of the time, if you screw up once, you're dead. And this is about as strong as your character is ever going to get. We're going to have to give up a lot of other really basic abilities in order to fight some of the other bosses. And once you give up one of those abilities, it never comes back. You do get something very small for defeating the boss, but it's not like you give up all of your health and stamina and then you get some of that back when you beat the boss and you just have to deal with a little bit of lingering effect. No, the health and stamina bars are going to remain shorter for the duration of the game. I could fight this guy later and have that extra health and stamina for fighting other bosses, but if I did that, then I'd be even weaker fighting Faiz Tilus, and I do not want that. So I think I'm getting into the groove of things here. Probably taking as much damage as I'm dishing out, which is not good, but I've got a lot of healing capability. And you can also lose track of him. I think I've got the free camera mode on. I didn't notice that I can actually reflect that big homing projectile back at him. I didn't see if it actually did any damage. It probably did a tiny amount of damage. Nothing that you do really does much. And I use the greatsword because of the stagger, but I don't think it does an appreciably larger amount of damage than the short sword. Plus, if you're using the smaller sword, you can attack more rapidly. So, generally that's the weapon I use if I need to do a lot of damage to the bosses quickly. Once he gets down to half health, he's going to climb onto that stump in the center of the arena. You can't damage him from there, and he just fills the entire room with poison. This is the kind of thing that's there just to make your first fight where you actually get to this point an instant loss. You will have no idea how to deal with this. And yeah, he spits a whole bunch of stuff at you while you can't do anything to defend yourself. And then finally he'll come back down to the ground and we can continue the fight. Like I said, this game, as you can probably tell if you've seen any of Dark Souls, this is just some of the worst bosses in Dark Souls, with no option to go and build up your character or find better spells or items or equipment to deal with the unique challenges that they present. And yeah, what do you really say about this? There's certainly some challenge to it. I can get, the people that generally go through and beat Dark Souls without leveling up, using only starting equipment, would really find an appeal to this sort of thing. Me, I cheat my way through Dark Souls. I do it all. Level up, get better equipment, use all the magic and pyromancy and spells that the game throws at you. And here's another wave of attacks that he does when he's almost dead. I have no idea what this purple stuff that's on my character is, but he summons in smaller versions of himself. They seem to do a completely different status effect. I've got my poison meter that's slowly building up. If it does fill up, then I have to deal with slowly losing health over time. My healing is limited, there's no way to get more of it. But at this point, I basically just take all of my throwing weapons, hurl them at this guy, and try to end the fight as quickly as possible without having to deal with any of the stuff that's going on around here. I guess his buddies have almost done whatever it is they're going to do to me, but that's the end of the fight. I could probably show off what he does to better advantage somehow or other, but I don't really feel like it. I just kind of want to get through this, find out if there is something that happens if I beat the game a second time. Maybe unlock some additional weapons. There are some boss weapons in here that would be kind of cool to have. So once you beat a boss, you get a little bit of extra health, which doesn't really make up for the fact that I drained a portion of it to fight this guy. And this black ooze kind of strolls down from the stone to collect in a pool in the center. I can get back the sacrifice that I made to him, but if I do that, it'll bring the boss back to life, I'll lose the extra health, and it'll be like I had never fought him. The game also puts you into this weird, constantly running state, even if you're not hitting the run button. You have to tap the run button to go back to walking again. So that was actually a little faster than I was expecting to happen. So let's have a preview of the other bosses that I'm going to be fighting, kind of. The game gives you this poem only the first time that you look at any particular stone. It's another one of those things that I'm sure has some meaning to someone, but I don't get it. And this guy is probably the worst of all the sacrifices you have to make. You give up your armor, so you take more damage from attacks, and you lose your auto-healing ability. Lustful Chanel is the next one over. I think this boss is meant to be even more significant than any of the others. And the sacrifice you make is that if you guard too much with your shield and run out of stamina, then your shield breaks. It still seems to work afterwards, which is kind of weird. Proud Roads. Not one of the more difficult fights, really, but I like to do him late because the sacrifice you make to him is reducing your attack power, so everything just takes longer. Then we have Gluttonous Camberluce. This one I kind of remember was like the captain of a ship off in search of treasure who ate his entire crew. And the sacrifice you make is your healing potential. You drop down to 5 healing orbs, and instead of an instant heal, they become a gradual heal over time, like going from Estus Flasks to Life Gems. His weapon is the one that I got for beating the game, the Blades of Gluttony. So yeah, he swings these thingies at you. Not a whole lot of fun. Then we've got Envious Levin Undok. I'm going to say it sounds like a Hindu name, kinda, but I have absolutely no idea what most of these names are supposed to be. You give up most of your item inventory. You drop down to 10 javelins, 3 firebombs, and no fire buffs. Finally, Slothful Yordo. Another really awful sacrifice. When you fight this guy, if you run your stamina meter empty, then your character will collapse exhausted for a few seconds. And believe it or not, that's the next one I'm going to fight in the next video. So, see you then.